everyone. I'm Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute and Professor of Enology. It's my privilege to welcome you to Birdhorse Wines, A Journey of Adventure. This is the very first of our new informal UC Davis series, Sips and Bites. Thank you for coming this evening. We have another Sips and Bites next month on beer, and in the fall we have both Savor and Form lectures coming up. More on that later. The Robert Mondavi Institute was created to provide a forum for the exchange of ideas in food and wine, and particularly between the departments, or with the departments of viticulture, enology, and food science and technology. Globally, viticulture enology is the highest ranked grape and wine program, and our graduates are in high demand. Tonight we're going to hear from two of them. At the RMI, we feel it is important to enhance public understanding of wine and food science by being involved in an exchange of ideas. So tonight we'll be looking for your questions. Please submit your questions to our winemakers using the Q&A tool on your Zoom interface, okay? We will try to answer as many questions as we can as we go along. Wine is of particular interest of the Robert Mondavi Institute, so we've chosen to start our new series with a wine tasting, one that will be both fun and educational. Our alumni winemakers will be presenting their own wines made from Verdelho and Val d'Aguay. Both are exciting but lesser known grape varieties from Spain and France, and both have unique flavors you don't find in usual wines in the market like Chardonnay or Zinfandel. And now I'd like to introduce this evening's guests, Corinne Rich and Katie Rouse. Corinne was born and raised in Sonoma County, California. She earned her BA in chemistry at the University of Pennsylvania, and after the world's briefest stint in pharmaceutical research, she returned to Northern California. She has spent time working in the wine grape circuit around the world, including Sonoma, Willamette Valley, New Zealand, and Australia before returning to school for her master's in viticulture enology at UC Davis. She is currently the cellar master at a famous winery in Napa Valley. That's her day job. Katie Rouse was born into a winemaking family in Rockbridge County, Virginia. She earned a BA in geology at Whitman College. Katie gravitated back to winemaking while living in Sonoma and working in the Carneros area. She came to study at UC Davis to learn the science of grape growing and winemaking. Katie also has a day job and is currently the cellar master and viticulture coordinator at another famous winery in Napa Valley. So, Corinne, let's start with you. You grew up in Sonoma, and I'm trying to figure out how you discovered wine. So you must have been like drinking wine from the age of 5, right? I mean, since you grew up in Sonoma, it was just part of daily life, right?
It's just in the air. It's just osmotic pressure, you know, as a youth. No, my parents were both certainly enthusiastic wine consumers, and they both loved and were very interested in wine. But growing up here, I'll be honest, it did not really occur to me that wine was a career option until long after I left. It was just like a thing that was like here, and it really didn't occur to me it could be a profession.
Okay. So how did you stumble into it?
So I, as you mentioned, went to the University of Pennsylvania and got my bachelor's degree in chemistry. And while I was there, as I was graduating, I had a job in pharmaceuticals, which I really, really did not like, and left very quickly, and was having a bit of a quarter life crisis. So I moved back to Sonoma County, drove all the way back from Pennsylvania to my mom's house. And
that sounds like fun, moving in with mom.
I mean, she's a delightful lady. Like, Denise is a great roommate.
Everyone's hope after college to move back with their parents.
But you know, I didn't want to be unemployed and living with my mom. So I started looking for a job before I even landed back in California. And I saw that a lot of wineries were looking for help during their harvest season in the laboratory. And I knew very little about wine, but I knew an awful lot about working in a laboratory.
Right.
I thought I would give it a go. And
Okay.
I probably applied to 30 different wineries, and they all said no, except for one. And that was it. And they said yes. And I loved my experience there. I thought it was so interesting and such a cool blend of like working with my hands and on my feet and doing science and being creative. And I learned that you could travel through the industry as well. And kind of from then on, I was hooked.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, Katie. Well, you must have grown up with a wine in your pacifier, right? Your parents were making wine from the time you were born. So is that how did you get involved at that point?
You know, if you consider leaf pulling in the summers and pruning in the winters against your consent involvement, then yes. Yeah, I mean, I was an indentured worker on the family farm as a youth, which did not enamor me of the romance and mystique of winemaking, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely was exposed to many things that I didn't really appreciate, and
so you didn't find wine captivating at that point?
Not at all. Sorry, Dad. You know, it all came back around. Yeah, no, I tried to get far away from the farming. Well, yeah, from winemaking, and did never think that it would be a path that I would travel.
You did select a college that was kind of far away from home, I noticed.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it was somewhat happenstance, somewhat on purpose. I went to Walla Walla, Washington to check out the West Coast. It seemed like a fun place to go and far away from what I knew. So it turned out well.
Yeah. So how did you actually end up then in wine? I mean, why are you where you are today? I mean, your parents obviously completely failed at convincing you about the standard of wine, right?
I know, exactly. I was just telling Corinne that my dad was very angry one time when I was younger. I opened a really old bottle of wine from the cellar, and with my friends we were like, oh, he probably doesn't need this, it's dusty, it looks terrible, let's make margaritas. We were too young to drink. Come to find, we drank it, we were like, this doesn't taste very good, it's sort of oxidized. It was a 40-year-old bottle of Trockenbeer and Auslese that my dad had been cherishing. And needless to say, he was none too pleased. I went to Whitman, studied geology, and I loved being outdoors. And I got involved in agriculture and soil science. And then took an inspiring class my senior year of college that kind of brought it all back together, called terroir, studying kind of the climate, soil, geology that goes into grape growing and wine production. And I was like, aha, maybe there is a connection. Maybe it's not so bad after all. So yeah, after a few years of traveling and working some more kind of geology-focused jobs, moved down to the Bay Area and thought I'd give it a go. And I was totally hooked, just like Corinne said. I mean, it's a synthesis of all these things that I really love, very hands-on, and yeah, have been doing it ever since and loving it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we, since this is a wine tasting, I thought we might actually try to do that. Some of our listeners here, I hope, have bottles handy. I see you. Okay, so one thing I noticed about your bottles the first time I got one is it was sort of a Herculean challenge to get the cork out of the bottle. So I was going to ask you, like, to show us how to open this bottle with this integral capsule, I guess I describe
Capsule
it.
Nouveau.
Capsule Nouveau. And Andy, as a chemist, I'm sure you'll appreciate that we changed our wax company this year to get a different wax formulation that is much easier to open than the old one. These are the things you learn the first couple of years of your business. So.
Very true. Yeah, so the thing with the wax is you just go straight through. You don't try to cut it away. So take your corkscrew
What?
and guide with your
You don't have to
finger.
cut it away, like to get out a chisel and.
No knives, no hacksaws.
No.
Save your
Far too
wounds.
risky. Far too risky.
Yeah, so just straight through the wax, all the way down until you would normally go into a bottle, and
Right.
then use your 2-step lever, and
It
voila.
just pops out.
Pops right out.
All right.
No worries.
Not so bad.
Not so bad.
Okay. All right. So let's see. I did want to ask you. So this wine is made from what grape?
Verdelho.
Verdelho. Okay. Now I do want to ask you. I mean, I'm sure you have a great story about how you picked this variety, but I think actually probably you're picking this varieties because you can't actually afford real grapes like Cabernet and Chardonnay.
Whoa, that is a charged way to ask that question. No, I mean the whole idea behind our brand Birdhorse is that like our message essentially is rediscovery and adventure, and so I think a lot of us understand that a very large portion of the market share here in California is occupied by a very small number of grapes. And there's such a huge diversity of climates and regions and kinds of areas that can grow different kinds of grapes in the state. And so we're really trying to showcase the other category, all of the grapes that have a history here, but that you more than likely haven't heard of yet.
Okay, so you could actually afford Cabernet if you wanted it?
Well, I mean, we're not here to talk about our accounting books. So.
I mean, that is one of the benefits, though, I would say, of working with lesser known varieties and lesser known regions. It does make it affordable, more affordable, for sure, for us to be in business and to make the wine that we make. But that wasn't necessarily the determining factor in why or how we came to do so.
Yeah.
All right, so we have some Verdelho here. So why did you decide, well, tell us a little bit, just tell us about this wine. Like, where does the grapes come from?
So this Verdelho comes from the Borden Ranch AVA, which is in Lodi. And one of the reasons we wanted to work with Verdelho is that it is a grape that loves the heat and retains its acidity really well. And obviously we live in a rather warm state that is progressively getting warmer. And so we wanted to make sure that we were selecting varieties that could handle the heat, that had bright, fresh flavors and really glowing acidity. And so Lodi, which is even hotter than it is here in Napa, where we are now, is a great place for grapes like this.
Ah, okay.
And
where does this grape come from originally? What region?
Originally, it's a Portuguese grape variety, and it's used to make Madeira. So traditionally, made in a very oxidized style. You will find some still Verdelhos, but not so common even in Portugal. Mm-hmm. And much less common in California.
Much less common in California. So this comes from an organically farmed vineyard. It's a grower named Marcus Bokish who focuses mostly on Iberian varieties. So we were really excited to work with him. And the grapes usually come in early August for us. And our handling of them at first is pretty straightforward. They go direct into the press. We press out the juice. Juice goes down to a big stainless steel tank, which is when we usually get a little more experimental with it.
Yeah, we do hyperoxidation of the juice before fermentation, which is a technique that I was exposed to first in South Africa, actually, when I worked for Molyneux in Franschhoek. And so kind of just spraying the juice over and over, exposing it to lots of oxygen, which creates all the brown pigments in the wine kind of crash out of solution, but you also develop a lot of texture and mouthfeel with the wine before fermentation, or with the juice before fermentation. And so what we were really striving for, this is a strategy used a lot in Burgundy actually for Chardonnay. We were looking for a lot of texture and mouthfeel we didn't want a lot of the primary aromatics, so a lot more of the fruity, bright aromas. We wanted to focus a lot more on texture. So that was the fun first part of the wine.
So someone here, one of our participants, is asking, why is acidity important?
Well, I guess the question should be, why is acidity important to you? Because I guess some people don't like super acidic wines, and that's totally fine and great. And there are lots of wines for those people to drink. But I think for us, acidity is really important because those are the kind of wines that we love, wines that have high acid, and as a result, like keeps them really bright and really, really fresh. And a lot of the times, wines that have some really great aging potential tend to have really wonderful acidity. So we just, yeah.
And make them very food friendly as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for approachability.
Another person is asking, since you did bring up South Africa, could you expand on that a little bit? Tell us a little bit more about your time there, or do we want to wait? Do you want to wait till later to talk about that?
We can talk about it now.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Corinne and I both went to South Africa. Corinne was there on a scholarship through UC Davis. And
Thanks, Davis.
Thanks, UC Davis. And I took a quarter off school to go work on harvest there as well. And I, through happenstance of a UC Davis connection again, was able to connect with Andrea Molyneux, who's a grad, and she gave me a job kind of on a whim. And Molyneux was a huge part of our inspiration to start Birdhorse Wines, actually. They've been part of, what's that?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're part of this greater movement in South Africa of newer producers who are trying to really revitalize the industry there by diversifying the kinds of grapes they work with. And so getting away from the traditional just Chenin Blanc and Pinotage that have kind of dominated the market there. And also by giving a lot of love and attention to older vineyards and trying to rehab them and thinking more about more minimal interventionist styles of winemaking. And so we came back from South Africa and thought, like, yes, this is an energy that really speaks to us. This is something that's important to us. And this is what we want to, like, this is our stake in the sand. This is what we want to do.
All right. So did you want to say anything more specific about this wine, the flavors in it that you are smelling? You said you're very interested in the texture, not so much in the fruitiness.
Absolutely. So I think one of the results of the hyperoxidation process is you don't lose all of the fruit aromas, but they kind of get a more deeper and a little more, we call it like a golden or a roasted component to them. So I think this wine has like a beautiful kind of tropical bouquet to it, but I think of it more as like a caramelized pineapple, kind of lifted. There's a real minerality to it as well. We do barrel ferment this, so I think you get a tiny bit of the woody character, but it's integrated really nicely in with the fruit flavors too.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the palate, you just get this really nice, kind of consistent, fine, I don't know, yeah, there's a little bit more texture than, say, a lighter Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio. Mm-hmm. And then a really nice little bit of bite on the finish, a little bit of phenolics.
All right.
Right, acidity.
Well, I think all right, okay, I have to ask, what would you pair this with?
Great question.
Are we going fancy pairing or not fancy pairing?
What would we pair this with?
Oh.
I would say we've talked a lot about this wine going well with spicier foods. And so we've had this with a couple of homemade Indian curries that we thought it was absolutely delicious with. We've also had it with just good old like roasted chicken with carrots and potatoes, and that, like, because it's got such a bright acid, those kind of like fattier, denser foods balance really well with it.
Okay, before we move on, actually this question is from someone you know. I believe you know Gus.
Hello, Gus.
I guess.
Would you consider making a more oxidative style of the Verdelho, like a Madeira, in the future?
That's a great question. We definitely have talked about doing a little bit more experimentation with Verdelho. Not quite to the level of a Madeira, but definitely playing around with some skin contact and overaging, for a longer time in barrel than the 6 months is normal. But yeah, something fun to think about.
It's unfortunately not built into our business model to age it for 5 to 10 years at this point in time, but that doesn't mean it won't ever be. So.
Exactly.
So.
Okay, well, I'm enjoying it, but I'm going to move on now and ask you some questions about something else.
Fantastic.
All right, now you're both Davis graduates, right?
That is what the Davis website told me after I submitted my thesis.
That's what our diplomas say, I think.
That's what they say. Can't take it back.
Now, well, the professors here are all scientists. And one of our goals is to convince our graduates to also be scientists. Well, sort of, right? But to use science, right? And so I want to know, do you do experiments in your job? Like, are you doing experiments and making your wine as part of your job?
I think one thing, well, for Birdhorse, and we can talk about our day jobs too, but for Birdhorse, I think we really pride ourselves on being experimental, and not necessarily in the like directest data capture fashion, though that would be something that would be cool if we had the tools, but I think
our volumes are very small.
Volumes are very small. Repeatability is hard, but I think we really strive to every year change a variable in a portion of a wine. So we kind of try to keep like 2/3 or 3/4 of the wine the same, and then take a portion of it and do something different, do something a little more interesting. And then that kind of gives us the freedom to blend it back if we like it, or make it vanish if we don't. And then in our day jobs, yeah.
I think you have more to say.
Yeah, I mean, like, in my day job, we do a little more formal experimentation. We have a redox probe, and we are measuring redox potentials for observational purposes, and have, yeah, I think there's a little more of what you would think about in terms of like formal-ish scientific experiments going on. So definitely, I think having those tools from Davis and how to think in terms of setting up an experiment have been really helpful.
So the training we gave you to like try out new things is part of how you work, part of how you operate.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we also at Davis, we like to talk about us, everyone collectively as our Davis family. So present company accepted. Are you in touch with any of your classmates?
Very much in touch. Yeah, I would say that they are some of our closest friends and colleagues currently.
I can hear one of them in the kitchen right now because we live with 3 of them, in fact. So yes, we are very much in touch with our classmates.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful network for sure.
Yeah.
Do they call you up and ask you for advice yet, or are you doing it the other way around?
It has been actually really fun to be a resource. Starting a business and starting a wine brand comes with a lot of compliance law.
Cool.
That luckily our third business partner, who's not here, Tyler, has been very helpful with. But yeah, it's a lot to get through. And I know that Davis now has done a class on compliance, but that has been a really big asset for us to be helpful to others.
Yeah.
As we've gone through the process very recently.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Any fun stories from Davis? Not classroom stuff, but.
You don't want us to wax poetically about everything we learned in 2019?
Well, we can move on.
No.
Yeah, I feel like, the program at Davis is incredibly rigorous, and a lot of the materials is compressed into 2 years. The first year is a little traumatizing, I will say. But I feel like through that pain, you develop these bonds with people that can't be escaped. It's just like this tightness. Like, I don't know, I ran cross country in high school, and I think of it in that way. Like, you're really suffering together, but then you're really close.
Yeah. And I just remember my spring quarter first year, we had just put on the Winkler dinner, which is our, the big annual fundraising event. And it's a ton of work. It's a ton of planning. A lot of love and care goes into that dinner. It's all put on by the students. And so afterwards, there is obviously an after party because everybody needs to let loose a little bit after an intense month and then culminating evening. And I just remember at the Winkler after party, it was so funny because a lot of people brought really cool wines for everyone to drink. And this was just supposed to be an evening of relaxation, which it was. But then every time a bottle got popped, 20 people get in a circle and everybody's swirling and smelling and talking about the wine, and then disperses and returns to relaxation and drinks and dancing. And it was this really funny cycle to be a part of, where I was like, man, only at Davis would a party be like this.
Only wine geek party, yeah.
Yeah. And Katie had a similar experience.
Yeah, we had a post exams holiday party, I want to say, my first year at one of my classmates' houses, and we all brought bottles of wine and made a bunch of food, kind of a potluck style. But one of my classmates brought a 4-year vertical of now I know to be a very prestigious and very rare champagne. At the time, I was like, oh, this is cool.
Salon, I've never heard of this before.
1998 through 2001. Okay, no big deal. We'll taste them. Yeah, and I mean, it's this small group of humans being able to relish this moment, which was such a Davis experience. Nowhere else would that ever happen. And then afterwards, we had a 1980 bottle of garlic wine from Rappazzini, and, kind of tasted that with a similar interest and kind of assessment. I was like, huh, what a place to be.
What an interesting foil.
Yes. Okay. Well, we've got some other questions here. I think we're going to move on to the next wine, but while you're pouring that, could one of you say more about redox probes?
Oh my. How long do you want this to be? Yeah, okay. So we
got 15 seconds here. All right.
Okay, redox probes, measuring the redox potential in a wine. What exactly is it telling you? Science hasn't told us yet, but generally it is describing the relationship in the wine between oxygen, and what we use it for at Spotswood is looking at microbial health. And so at this point, there's been enough experimentation where when you have the redox probe in your wine, as you monitor it, as it reaches certain points in the curve, you can get an idea of when your yeast cell population has reached its maximum, which can help inform your decisions about how much oxygen you should be incorporating and when you might want to think about doing your nutrient adds, if that's something that you do. The jury is really still out on a lot of it, and we're doing it in large part for observational purposes. But yeah, really hoping to learn and do more with it.
Let's see. Another question, which is sort of business related. Are you going to be expanding back? I mean, are you going to be selling your wine in the East or the South, or in Virginia, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a thing that's on our mind, and we continue to grow and expand every day, basically. It's a matter of kind of thinking about our marketplace and our volume of wine that we're selling. But we are licensed now in Pennsylvania. We're licensed in New York State, and then Washington and California. But Virginia's definitely on the list, especially since it's where I'm from. But yeah, it's part of the conversation is getting involved with distribution. At this point in our scale and our time available, we can't travel to all these places and establish these relationships. But we're in talks with some distributors that are super small and focus on wines that are kind of outside the box like ours. And yeah, it's in the works for sure.
All right, so speaking of an outside the box wine, I was just going to mention that Valdeguay, that's how I pronounce it. I don't know, there's several pronunciations. I think I really enjoy the grape. I've had it from several different producers. I think one of its problems is it's hard to pronounce. Thinking if there's a simpler spelling or if it had a synonym that was really easy to pronounce, it might do better in the market. Anyway,
You're saying Napa Gamay is what it should be called?
well, there's a long, complicated, checkered history of this.
Indeed.
Is there ever?
Maybe someone could apply to call it Napa Gamay, and we could then call it that going forward. I don't know. That would be great. Why don't you tell us about this wine? Where'd the grapes come from? Why'd you pick these, and so on?
Yeah. So this Valdiguet comes. We say Valdiguet. Say it however you want. Comes from Sassoon Valley over in Solano County, just east of the Baca Mountains from Napa. And I actually had worked with this vineyard when I was working in Sonoma in the Carneros. We bought this fruit and fermented it and used it as a kind of a blending grape. But I was super enamored of it. I'd never heard of Valdiguet. I was like, what? We called it Valdiguet there. So there you go. It's like, why don't we make this by itself? No one was that I knew of. Maybe Michael Cruz was, and I just wasn't aware. But yeah, when Corinne and I started Birdhorse, I was able to get back in touch with the grower, and we were able to secure some of the fruit. It's a really lovely, fruity, low tannin red wine. Back in the 60s and 70s in Napa and Sonoma, it was called Napa Gamay because it is bright and fruity and approachable. But I think that really kind of struck our style of winemaking that we were looking for, something that's really easy to drink, can have some complexity, but you don't have to think too hard about it if you don't want to. Yeah, and we've really loved working with it. This is our second year working with this vineyard, and yeah.
It's a pretty cool vineyard too. The vines are about 40 years old, which if you think about it timeline-wise, it's actually kind of surprising because the late 70s is when most of the Napa Gamay was getting ripped out of the Napa Valley. And then these folks came around and planted their vineyard in like 1980, right after the population of Valdiguet had been kind of decimated just over the mountains. And so it's pretty cool to find a vineyard of Valdiguet grapes that's this age.
Mm-hmm.
And so to make the wine, the grapes usually come in for us in October. And we destem part of it. So we do about 50% whole cluster, so still on the stems, fermented in an open top bin. We punch it down twice a day. It stays on skins for a little over 2 weeks. But then we also took a portion of those grapes and decided to get really experimental with it. And we took about a half ton and we destemmed them into a giant food grade plastic bag, which we then smushed all of the air out of, sealed up with a couple of zip ties, and left alone for 3 weeks.
How long?
About the same amount of time as the T-bin was fermenting, so about 2.5 weeks.
Didn't it start to like give off gas or something, maybe?
Great question. So the bag inflates like a huge balloon, which is why you double bag it so that it does not pop. And it's really interesting because it's a fully anaerobic fermentation style, but it's not the same as a carbonic because we're not pumping in CO2 or anything. And it makes a really different wine. So the open top bin fermentation, it was like super red, fruity and lifted and bright. But then the stuff that came out of the bag had this like really dense texture to it and this beautiful floral component to it, which then when we blended it all together, it just made this like much more layered and complete wine. And we were super happy with it.
I have to admit, I haven't heard of fermenting in a big plastic bag before.
I feel like you've seen a lot, Andy, so I am proud to hear you say that.
I know, it was a technique Corinne had experienced at her day job that they used with some other grape varieties. So yeah, we were excited to experiment on our own. Mm-hmm. Happy with the result.
Experimental approach from UC Davis, of course.
You asked us if we do experimentation. That's a great example of that.
Yeah, most of the winemakers, so we work in a cooperative winemaking space for Birdhorse in Santa Rosa, and all of the other winemakers during harvest would come up to us, and because there's this big inflated bag in a macro bin just sitting around the winery. They're like, what's happening?
What
What's
is this?
in that? What's going on? It really flummoxed a bunch of people. And we were delighted to show them the result at the end, which was a really beautiful wine. Yeah,
that's pretty funny.
No hint of any kind of microbial or volatile acidity issues at all, just very clean.
Did you put yeast in the bag?
No. So all of our ferments are native fermentations. So we don't
It's just whatever was in there.
Whatever was in there did the most native of fermentations. Nothing from the air in the winery or anything could have really influenced it.
Yeah, which is interesting because as we work in a custom crush facility and all of our winemaking is native, so we don't inoculate for anything. But there's always the argument of, is it a native fermentation?
How native is it?
Is it just the yeast that's in the custom crush facility? So in this case, 100%. Definitely native. We can say hands down. Yeah. Otherwise, there's a little wiggle room for sure, but certainly interesting expression.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so before we move on, we have to wrap up this wine with the question about pairing again. So what would you serve with this particular wine? This is, to me, it's quite soft in the tannins. Beautiful aromas, though. I just love this. It's to me, it's got a peppery character to it, but maybe that's just me. I'm not sure.
No, there definitely is a pepperiness. I think, we chose to increase the stem inclusion or the whole cluster element for this wine to 50% for that reason. So extracting a little bit more stem tannin to give a peppery, spicier element.
Definitely. And as far as a pairing goes,
we have made like Moroccan lamb meatballs work really nicely. If we're getting fancy.
Very specific. Yeah. And we've talked about this with like smokier things and barbecued things. I think this holds up really well because it's got that fruitiness to play against the like tang of a barbecue sauce, and I think it's still got the bright kind of acid to it, and like you said, the kind of peppery quality, and that has tend to pair really well with barbecue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see. If we want to move on, then I do want to ask you about what you're planning to do with Birdhorse. So you talked about you were inspired in South Africa. So what is the basic concept here behind Birdhorse that you're trying to do?
I think, like Corinne said earlier, there's a lot of winemaking history that's happened in California, and we're certainly not trying to disrupt anything, but more celebrate the history and the unique varieties that have been planted in California for a long, long time, but perhaps gotten pushed to the fringes a little bit. Kind of celebrating that rediscovery and diversity of California's wine growing heritage. Yeah.
And I think there's a real desire right now, also just from consumers, it would seem, to start trying new things and getting away from the more traditional iterations of California wine. And that's really where we feel like we fit in, where diversification of the market is so important to us, and we're really trying to reimagine what California wine can be. And so, we said this earlier, but there's such a huge variety of regions and climates. And so it seems crazy that there are only like 10 grapes that really seem to represent the state when we have such a large swath of different kind of people and places that grow grapes.
And it's an exciting time, I think, for us and for a lot of small new brands in the industry to be celebrating these different varieties, because there's a new generation of wine drinkers who I think are a lot more open to trying new things, and they don't care if they haven't heard of the grape variety. They're just excited if it tastes good. So that's been a really exciting part of our journey in kind of educating consumers and sharing what Birdhorse is all about, is telling people what Valdeguet is, or talking about our Nace, which is the other white that we made, talking about Verdelho, and hoping to kind of spread the word.
And I think there's a real desire right now, and I know we mentioned this earlier, but like I think value-driven wines are becoming more important than ever, because, you know, I think there's a lot of mystery around right now. Like, what is the millennial generation gonna do with wine? We don't know. And I'm not here to answer that question, but I do think that millennials, in large part, are a generation of wine drinkers who their introduction to wine was probably like Trader Joe's, where you can get a totally delightful bottle of wine for $10 that is going to like fill everything you wanted out of it. And so I think now more than ever, people who are becoming the majority wine consumers are really looking for value and affordability, and they want a story too that compels them and that speaks to them. But I think that, you know, luxury wine is always going to be there. But I think people are starting to raise an eyebrow a little more than perhaps in the past.
Okay, so not to dig, well, I'm asking you for your secrets. So is there some variety you would really like to get your hands on that you think is important for California and you'd really love to get, or maybe you don't want to tell us? Secret for next year.
No, it's not a secret, I think. Yeah, I mean, there was one variety in particular that really inspired us in South Africa, and we think also would do really well in California. It does well in its small iterations, but we just haven't found it yet that it's available. Cinsault, or Cinsault, is a really delicate, beautiful red grape. It looks like a table grape, but can make some really awesome red wine. So that so far is our unicorn grape.
And I think also something that we did make last year that we are releasing next year, you know, Italian grapes have such a long history in California, right? They were some of the original grapes planted here, other than like Mission, which would also be very cool to work with, but it's also very hard to find. But there are lots of Italian grapes, and so we made a Barbera last year that we're really excited about. We're overwintering it, so we're holding it in barrel for a little over a full calendar year to give it time to age and develop. And we're super excited to share that with people coming in 2021.
Yeah.
Coming soon, huh?
Exactly.
All right. So let me ask you just a few more questions about your experience. So you both have day jobs, and it seems like it's a bit of a juggle then. I mean, I guess the real question is how much of your time is dedicated to your own brand versus your day job, or can you even explain that, or how do you juggle all that? It just seems like you must be crazy busy.
Yeah,
with a lot of passion,
a lot of driving. Yeah, it's definitely been challenging. I will say year one was incredibly challenging because Katie was here for the beginning of harvest, but then went on a UC Davis scholarship to go work in Burgundy, which was an incredible experience for her, but left me here as the boots on the ground. And she has since more than compensated for all the time that I put in by putting in double time herself. But it's definitely been, I think, a lesson in both of us in letting go a little bit, because we're both very committed to our day jobs. We both told them when we started this label that like they would come first, since obviously like they hired us first. They're the ones giving us the paycheck, and they're very important to us. And then for Birdhorse, this is our passion project, and we both want to do everything all the time, always, right? Like we want to be there for every pick and every punch down and every pressing. But I think we have started to learn that we just have to divide and conquer sometimes, and that's just got to be the way that it is. And so if we need to go to Lodi to do a walkthrough of the Verdelho vineyard, we don't both have to go. I can go one time and Katie can go the next time, and it's great when we can both go together, but I think it's important for our
Vanity?
Mental health to have some time away from both jobs sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been the beauty of being in this or starting this brand as a partnership, is that we can kind of meter those time crunch times, like during harvest when we're both crazy busy at our day jobs and then have to do a lot of work for Birdhorse, we can divide and conquer, like Corinne said.
And I will say Tyler, who, if he's watching, hi Tyler, is our third business partner, and he is my best friend from undergrad, and he has been much more of the business and compliance side of things, but he has been like our secret weapon. Like we could not have done this without him. He has done so much of the behind the scenes stuff. He has like come in the nick of time to help us so much. And so it's, yeah, been a really great lesson in like, we don't have to take all of it on ourselves all the time.
And from starting a business perspective has been invaluable in terms of guidance and
occasionally disagreeing with us, because otherwise we would just agree with each other all the time.
Exactly, a good sounding board.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we've got several people asking a question. Well, maybe I'll hold that till later, but well, no, I'm just going to ask you now. So why did you name your brand Birdhorse? That seems to be a question I think everybody has on their mind. So,
yes.
What a great question.
Birdhorse, not birdhouse.
Not birdhouse.
For the record.
It's not birdhouse.
Although we are looking into a partnership with Tony Hawk and his brand for skateboarding.
That's not true.
No, it came, it's a very whimsical story. I think Corinne tells it best.
Yeah. So it has come to represent, like, we wanted a brand name that was a thing you could imagine, but you didn't know exactly what it was, because that's kind of the ethos behind our brand. And so we were in South Africa and had a number of light beers. And we were talking about a segment from NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, the NPR news quiz.
We are grandmas.
We love public radio. And it was a segment where the panelists had been talking about how they classify people in the world. And one of them said that they have 3 descriptors and everybody in the world gets 2 of them. And the order of them matters. And you're either a bird, a horse, or a marshmallow. And so we decided that I was a bird marshmallow that Katie was a bird marshmallow and I was a horse marshmallow.
This is totally self-described.
Self-described.
You really have to
look inside,
seek within yourself,
see what you are. And so together, if you take the marshmallow part out, you make a bird.
Okay. Let me see. Well, how big do you want your brand to get? That should be an easy one.
Should it?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have projections and hopes. You know, all things hopefully maintaining a good level of consistency in the market. But yeah, we're looking to grow to, I think, about 1,000 cases. Right now is our projection in the next
couple of years. I think what we really want is we want to get to a level where Katie and I can both be full-time with the business. I think that's like just, and whatever case volume that is, that equates to the financial element that can support us both. Because I think we both feel pretty passionately about this project and that like we would like to work for ourselves someday. I think that's something that freedom and independence is pretty important to us. And so like exact case volume, I don't have the financial projections in front of me, but I think, yeah, I don't think we have a hard stop for how big we want it to get, but I think we also don't want it to get too big. So yeah, it's a good point. More of a feeling.
Okay, so here's a cute question. Where do you like to go for wine tasting? In California.
Ooh, that's a great question.
Like back when you could go to wine tastings?
Well, presumably, yes, that question does suggest that there are tasting rooms that are open, which they are right now.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we love going up to the Anderson Valley. We are both also avid outdoors people and love camping up in Hendy Woods, but there are a lot of really wonderful producers up in the Anderson Valley. It's a lot easier now easier up there also to just kind of pop in, whereas here reservations and advance notice is a lot more required.
And I think West County, Sonoma is pretty near and dear to our hearts. And so we've got some favorite producers out that direction as well. I know Rhyme, which is Ryan and Megan Glabb's project, has always been one of our favorites to check out. Megan is we both admire her an awful lot, and we love the wines that they make. So we've definitely made it out that direction a number of times.
Yeah.
All right. Now I have a sort of philosophical question. I've been pushing this idea around in my own head. And so the question is, do you think of yourselves as artists? And do you think of winemaking as, or wine as art?
Ooh. I think in my mind, I make a distinction between art and artisan, whereas art is creation for the sake of creation and observation, whereas I think artisan has a practical component to it. It's a thing that you make that people can touch and use and consume. So I certainly have never called myself an artist, nor would I, but I think artisan is a word that I think resonates more with me.
Yeah, I think it's hard to put it in the box of simply art. And yeah, I mean, there obviously are a lot of creative and artistic elements that get used in winemaking. But I agree with Corinne. I think artisanal, more than art.
I think if you had a winemaking project that was 100% only creativity, it might be really cool, but it would be a little harder to sort of have it have a direction and a business component, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, so to wrap this up, we can't leave without asking this question, which is not a simple one, but there's so much angst in the wine industry now around diversity. There's all these articles I see almost every day about the issues with lack of diversity in the wine business. And are you thinking about changing the way you operate to address that or increase diversity, or what are you thinking about those questions?
Yeah, it's definitely a question that's been really, always on our minds, but especially due to current circumstances, much more so. I think we just are trying to continue to be part of conversations. And I know in our day jobs, it's a larger conversation about how to be much more inclusive. But yeah, there are a lot of really cool initiatives these days. There's Batonage, which is a conference for women in the wine industry that we've been participants in. A lot of,
Yeah, and I think, there's so much talk about how important representation is. And obviously a lot of that talk has been in regards to people of color, which we both support and think is super important. We also feel like talking about wanting queer representation in the wine industry is important. And that's something that just as a result of who we are and having our brand, we're trying to champion and be good representations of. And, I think we both feel really passionately about finding ways to support people of color. We sold 3 packs this last month that we're donating $20 from to the Oakland LGBTQ Community Center, which supports queer people, but specifically has a lot of support for queer people of color. So it's the kind of thing we want to champion, and we want to try to lend our support in the most meaningful way that we can going forward, but also keeping in mind that we're a teeny tiny business. So
yeah, but I think more voices are always valuable. So just keeping our voices heard and staying vocal about it is going to be part of what's critical in keeping the conversation going and keeping momentum.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap it up. So I was just going to ask you if you had anything else you wanted to say before we go. I do want to thank you for these two lovely wines. I mean, I was really happy you picked the Val de Guay, or however you pronounce it. I love that wine. And the Verdelho is such a pleasant and crisp white wine. So I'm looking for crispness in my whites.
So glad you enjoyed it. Yeah. I mean, shameless plug. Please feel free to sign up for our mailing list on our website. which is birdhorsewines.com. Love to continue the conversation with everyone who's tuning in this evening.
Yeah, so these wines will continue to be available, right, on your website, at least until they sell out, right? Which could be any day now, so order soon.
No, absolutely.
Good advice.
Yeah, and thank you all. Thanks to everyone who participated in the tasting portion too. I hope you enjoyed the wines, and everyone else. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Well, it was a lot of fun and maybe even educational. And best of luck growing Birdhorse. And I do hope that maybe in the not too distant future, I'll be able to drop in and say hi when that's feasible. So.
We would love that.
Always look forward to your visit, Sandy. We would love that.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we're going to say goodbye to you, and then I'm going to say something else to the audience here. So.
Awesome.
Thanks
Cheers.
so much.
Some of you may have been wondering where I've been standing. And no, I'm not in my home wine cellar. I'm in the special collections room for viticulture and enology here at UC Davis. Let's see, I was going to tell you a little bit about the kind of wines we have in the cellar and why we have them. So one of the types of wines we have here is our special wines that have been donated for the purpose of being in our collection and commemorating an event. So for instance, this particular bottle was donated by Margaret Mondavi back in 2010, and it's a bottle of the Robert Mondavi 96 Reserve Cabernet, beautiful wine, of course. And in practice, I suspect this wine will in fact never be poured. It's too important because it's got her signature on here and commemorates her. Now, most of the wines here are here for the purpose of allowing our students to taste a whole lot of different wines. Wines from all areas of the state. We even have some wines from different parts of the world. And the idea is that our students in their tasting class actually get to taste these somewhat difficult to source wines. So this is wines made from grapes grown at UC Davis Vineyard. So UC Davis has a vineyard in Napa Valley that's in Oakville, the Oakville area, and a number of different varieties are planted there. But we sell the grapes to Silverado Vineyards, and the winemaker there is a Davis graduate, of course. His name is John Emmerich, and every year or two he makes a batch of wine from our grapes for us to bottle, right? And has the UC Davis brand on here. Now, you can't buy this in stores. We bottle small quantities, and essentially we give it away to visitors who come here, people from other universities or maybe government officials who come from different countries. They'll come here and visit and tour our facility, and we'll give them a bottle of this. And of course, for very special occasions, the chancellor and so on actually gives people samples of this wine for on the occasion of that special event. So we have those kinds of wines here. And then we also have some less common wines. We're gonna walk over here and see one from California from some years ago. So let's come over here. So this is Louis Martini, Sonoma Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. And most likely, it doesn't specify on here, this is from the Martini's Monte Rosso Vineyard, which is in Sonoma Valley. It's where they grew some of their best grapes for many years. It's a fantastic vineyard. And so these wines have been donated over the years. So the wines come from donations by the wine companies. So this obviously was donated by the Martini winery many years ago. And then every few years we'll request wines of specific types because we're trying to build out a collection used for the wine tasting class. So we have to have very specific wines And we're requesting those periodically to fill out that inventory and make sure that students have access to these different wines. But in addition to those donated by the wine companies, we also have wines donated by sellers. So that 1970 Grob's wine was donated by a family. They decided they didn't really need all the wine in their wine cellar, and so they decided to donate the balance of the wine to UC Davis, and we put it to good use. So I was just going to mention that just in case you have a wine cellar that has more wine in it than you need, we can definitely put it to very good use. So I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you for joining us. We have a number of upcoming events. The ones that are on the calendar right now, of course, are all virtual. We have our second Sips and Bites, be a tasting of award-winning student beer made by Sudwork right here in Davis and hosted by our new brewing professor, Glenn Fox. Our next Savor event is set for the fall, November 10th, where we will have a three-person panel discuss how climate change is going to alter grape growing here in California. That'll include Assistant Professor Elizabeth Forrestel, winemaker Dan Petrosky from Larkmead in Napa Valley, and Esther Mobley from the wine writer at the San Francisco Chronicle. We also have a forum lecture planned for October 8th on how genetics is a powerful tool in viticulture with Professor Dario Cantu and Dr. Mariana Fasoli. If you're on the list, which I would strongly recommend if you aren't, you will get plenty of reminders, and I hope you'll be able to listen in on those future events. As I mentioned earlier, the wines will continue to be available from Birdhorse until they sell out, so go ahead and check it out. And thank you very much for attending this evening, and hope to see you at a future event.